Now, how many times have you heard this question asked before? I got so-and-so motor, so-and-so heads, intake, cam, compression ratio. What should I set my timing to? How many times have you heard this answer? I can't tell you. Or some people think they know and spew out some numbers when they really have no idea. Why is it something that seems like it should be so basic so hard to, why can't you get a straight answer? Well, I'm going to tell you why. And I'm not going to be able to tell you what to set your motor to. What I'm going to tell you is why I can't tell you. In order for me to fully tell you what it is I'm not telling you, we have to first understand what it is to begin with. In order to do that, I'm going to have to run down basically the entire motor. Because like most things in life, one thing is connected to all the other things, and if any of the other things changes, so does that. With that being said, let's get this started. Alright, start things off. What is timing? What does it mean? Timing is simply what time do you set off the spark plug? What time do you send a current to the spark plug to make a spark to ignite the fuel mixture? That's it. That's all timing refers to. But there's more than just one timing. There's initial timing, total timing, and literally everything in between. Let's not worry about that so far. Right now, I'm going to just talk about timing in general. So as your motor's running, you got your piston going up and down the cylinder bore, right? You know, this is connected to your crankshaft. It's rotating around in a circle, right? Pushing your piston up and down. What we want is for the piston to get all the way to the top, and once it starts its way down, we ignite the fuel mixture and shove the piston down the bore. That's what we're trying to achieve when we're talking about timing. So far, so easy, right? I mean, that's pretty easy to understand, but don't you think we should know exactly when that is by now? Why is that so hard to tell me? Well, there is a very specific time in which to actually have the spark happen. You want this piston to get shoved down the cylinder as hard as it can. Now, with timing, if you ignite it too soon, you're going to have the explosion come hitting a piston trying to make its way up, and you're going to break rods and piston tops and everything else. Not going to be good. But if you do it too late, the piston's already getting shoved down the bore from momentum before the flame front can catch up to it. A flame burns at the same rate regardless of how fast the motor's going. That's our issue number one. What RPM is this happening at? Now at a low RPM, the flame can catch up to the piston, right? But the faster this piston goes, the flame can't catch up to it. That's why we have advanced timing as RPM increases, because you need to ignite that mixture sooner, so by the time it burns, you're hitting the piston at the correct place and time to get the most downwards force on it as possible. Now, I said timing advances as RPM goes up. What does advance mean? Advance means you ignite it sooner. Retarded means you ignite it later. That's all you gotta know about that. You advance the timing, spark happens sooner. You retard the timing, spark happens later. Okay, so we're following along, right? Pretty easy stuff so far. Now, this is where things get more nuanced and more complicated. Now, the piston, as the piston moves up and down the cylinder bore, it's connected to the crankshaft. The piston is pushing the rod is pushing the crankshaft is rotating. So, when you decide to push this piston is very important on how much torque you're going to make, and torque is a mathematical equation to horsepower. So, a little crude, I know, so, but if you decide to ignite your mixture when everything is up and down, you can push as hard as you want on this piston top. It's not going anywhere. It's not going to rotate this crankshaft because it's deadlocked. It's up and down. You can also break stuff doing that too. Okay? When your crankshaft is at an angle, this is 90 degrees, at this point, you have the maximum amount of leverage on this crankshaft pushing down in order to rotate it. Now, obviously, you don't want to ignite your mixture right here because what we said before, the flame has to have time to travel down to this point. Preferably, we ignite it up here and we follow the piston down all the way to this 90-degree point. The closer we get to pushing it when it's at 90 degrees, the more power you'll make. Let me say it another way. If you're trying to loosen a bolt, do you push down like this, or do you push like this? You want to get the most leverage on that bolt as you possibly can. So you don't do it here. At this point, you could start moving it. And at this point, you have the most maximum amount of leverage possible. Same thing with a piston and a crankshaft. Don't ignite your mixture here, because it ain't going anywhere. You ignite it here and follow it all the way down. That's how you make power. Okay. So we know what we're trying to achieve now. Okay. We know what's supposed to happen. We should know theoretically how fast a flame travels, right? I mean, somebody knows that. I don't know that per se, but somebody out there does. So where does the complication begin? Because so far, everything should be pretty, should be universal, shouldn't it? No, not even close. Every single engine is going to require different timing. Because we know what we're trying to achieve, but what we're trying to achieve changes with every little change. Bore diameter is huge. That changes it because the flame has to travel a different amount in a different area and everything else. The length of the bore, or should I say the deck height of the block, that changes it because, now it's all different. Your crankshaft, stroke, the length of your, everything changes everything. That's part of the reason why I can't tell you exactly what timing to set your motor because, well, every single motor is different. Okay, but if you did know all those parameters, your bore size, stroke, these are basic things engine builders know. Well, if you knew all of that, wouldn't you be able to say what timing to do it at? No, because there's even more. Okay, now this is the part where things really start to get complicated. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to tell you one major thing and then piggyback off of that major thing to all these other things that affect that major thing. And what that major thing is cylinder fill. What is that? Simply put, cylinder fill is the amount of air-fuel mixture that gets into the cylinder. Do not think that that cylinder gets completely full at 6,000 RPM. Or don't think it gets completely full down at idle either. In an ideal world, the cylinder will always be 100% full all the time, but it doesn't happen like that. Think about it. The air has to go through your intake, through your heads, through these valves, has to fill this big cylinder, and everything's happening at what, 800 RPM, 800 times per minute at idle, let alone up to who knows how many RPMs. There's not enough time for everything to get into that cylinder. So that's really the biggest issue with timing, is trying to judge how full is the cylinder, because cylinder fill affects flame front. Now I know I said that a flame travels the same speed regardless of RPM, and that's true. The flame does travel the same speed regardless of what, RPM your motor's at. It doesn't travel the same speed depending on what air-fuel mixture you have, though, because each molecule of fuel gets individually ignited. Okay, so what does that mean? That means if you have a loose mixture, right, there's not, because remember, cylinder fill, the whole cylinder isn't full of air. The cylinder was a vacuum up until you open the intake valve. Then whatever air fuel got in through the intake valve before it shut is in that cylinder. The cylinder is not full. It's, So depending on how loose or compact that mixture is inside the cylinder determines how quickly the flame spreads, or if the flame spreads. See what I mean? The closer everything is together, faster it spreads. Imagine a pile of leaves, right? If you lit a pile of leaves on fire, it would whoosh, But if you lit one leaf on fire over your yard, covered in leaves, it would take a while for all those leaves to burn, wouldn't it? Some of it might not even burn because it wasn't close enough to the original ignition point. So, cylinder fill and timing are like the two biggest rivals. Because right now we're trying to shoot for this perfect time to ignite our mixture to push down on our cylinder, but now we have this guessing game of how fast does the flame travel. Great. Well, what else could be, a part of this? Well, what else is a part of it is compression ratio. I mean, how compressed everything is, how loose of a mixture it is. Compression ratio plays a role in that too. That's basically its MO, is how compressed does it make the fuel-air mixture, or how non-compressed it is. Lower compression, stuff isn't mixed together quite as tight. If you have low compression and low cylinder fill, well, stuff is miles away from each other. That needs a lot of time in order to completely burn that air-fuel mixture. If you have high compression and you have a high cylinder fill, then you don't need nearly as much time to ignite this whole thing. Okay, so what else affects cylinder fill? That corresponds with cylinder fill, but what affects cylinder fill? Vacuum. Vacuum affects cylinder fill. Vacuum, okay, what is that? Now I have to explain that too. See how this gets pretty convoluted? By the time we're done, it's going to be, okay. Vacuum. Remember, the cylinder, it's not full of air. It got ignited, it burned, it shoved everything out through the exhaust. Now it's on its way down. That's a vacuum. There's nothing in that cylinder right now. There is, but we're just gonna, it's basically a vacuum. The piston moving down is the thing that draws the air through the intake valve. It's sucking the air-fuel mixture through your carburetor, your, intake, through your heads. It's drawing on it like a vacuum. Okay, so let's take idle for instance. A normal motor has like 20 inches of mercury at idle. If you got a big, hardy camshaft in there, that can drop to like 15 degrees, 10 degrees, 5 degrees, not degrees, inches of mercury at idle. And if you don't have a lot of suction, you don't have a lot of oomph pulling your air fuel mixture into the cylinder, then it's a loose mixture. Just like we said before, loose mixture needs more time to ignite. That's why big camshaft cars like a lot of initial timing. The compression ratio thing. We talked about static compression ratio, but remember cylinder fill? Cylinder fill is your dynamic compression ratio. Dynamic compression ratio is basically how much is in the cylinder and how compressed it's getting. See, tied that whole system right together, didn't I? Of course, it's not 100% the same thing, but it's close. It's close to being the same thing. Okay, let's get to initial versus total. Okay, initial timing versus total timing. What is that now? Your timing has to change, right? Because depending on how fast the motor is going, your target changes. Think about it if you're hunting. If you're hunting and whatever you're hunting is moving, do you shoot right at it? No. You shoot in front of it. That's why we advance the timing, so that it hits each other. Well, in order to keep that same, point, you have to advance the timing as RPM rises. So total timing is the total number of degrees the spark plug will fire. Initial timing is the initial amount of degrees that the spark plug will fire. The bare minimum is initial. The maximum is total. And everything in between is... Let's get back to that. Okay, this is starting to get a little overwhelming, isn't it? Just the vast amount of information that you need to kind of absorb in order to figure out what in the world is going on here. Well, unfortunately, there's even more. Like, okay, what else affects cylinder fill? Basically everything. I mean, from your intake, your carburetor or throttle body, your heads, the size of your valves, the size of your exhaust. Literally everything from the top of your motor to the bottom of your motor affects cylinder fill. Okay. That's fine. Okay, so basically cylinder fill is the most important thing we got. Is there any way to figure out exactly how full the cylinder is? Not really, no. I mean, air-fuel ratio might be the closest, but even that's just telling you the air-to-fuel ratio, not necessarily how much of it there is. You can have perfect air-fuel ratio, but only have about that much in there. Or you could have, terrible air-fuel ratio, but you got the whole cylinder full of it. That's basically why we upgrade camshafts and cylinder heads and intake manifolds and put bigger throttle bodies or carburetors on, is an attempt to get as much air into the motor as possible. The motor itself is going to make a certain amount of power, NA. NA. Now we got to cover naturally aspirated versus boosted and nitrous. Great. Okay, well, I guess let's talk about power adders. How does a power adder make power to begin with? Well, we gotta go back to the old crankshaft drawing here. What a power adder does, it puts more fuel, more air into the motor so that this piston can get pushed further to take more advantage of this 90-degree angle. Okay? Most of your air and fuel is used up here, and the piston goes the rest of the way with momentum. Basically, you take a ball and you smack it and it flies across the room. You're not pushing the ball across the room. You gave it one hard smack and it flew across the room with momentum. That's what the piston's doing. When you add nitrous, when you add boost, what you're doing is you're putting more in so that it gives a longer push. Like I said, the closest you can get to this 90-degree angle point, pushing, don't go past it. Bad things happen when you go past it. But right here, the most you can get pushing through this 90-degree power point, your motor is going to make the most power. That way. That's why power adders work. All it's doing is it's pushing the piston further. That's the point. So needless to say, when you're on a power adder, you're putting more things into that cylinder. You have a denser cylinder fill. So what happens with the timing? You don't need quite as much of it. That's why you retard timing with boost or nitrous. It's because there's more in there and your cylinder fill is denser. Okay, so there's a certain point where you want the piston to get pushed. There's a certain amount you want the piston to get pushed, up to 90 degrees. That changes depending on the cylinder fill, because the cylinder fill determines how quickly the flame travels, and you need to know how quickly the flame travels in order to determine when to ignite it so that it travels to the piston top, pushing it down at the time that you want it to. Okay. Oh, and that's affected by RPM. Okay. Because the RPM varies from 800 all the way up to who knows how much. Now, it'd be really nice if your cylinder fill was, equated to RPM. Like your cylinder fill was good and it just kind of slowly went straight down as RPM went up. That'd be really convenient, but that doesn't happen either. Your cylinder fill kind of goes kind of like that. And if you have a far enough RPM, it basically does this. And that's because of harmonics from pulsation. Your intake manifold, carburetor, everything's pulsing. It's not a nice smooth draw. It's a give and take. That's why tunnel rams, like long intake runners, they draw in, the valve shuts, that wave gets sent back up the runner, then it opens and it shoves even more stuff in. I can't cover literally everything to do with the pulsation in this video. Just know it's there and it affects your cylinder fill, which affects your timing. Oh, but wait, that's only in one cylinder. Every cylinder you have is its own little ecosystem with different cylinder fills and air-fuel ratios. And okay, so what do you do? Well, let's just break it down in little rules of thumb. Okay, most engines like anywhere between 32 and 36. Most engines. Some engines will be way out of that range. Some engines will be way below that range. Okay, so rules of thumb. High compression, you don't need quite as much timing. Low compression, you might need a little more timing. At idle, if you have low vacuum, then you might need more timing to let that loose mixture burn, like we did with Project Iron Horse. Low compression, same thing. Idle, might need a little more timing. If a motor's worn out, the rings are gone, seals are gone, low cylinder fill, low, it's all loose, might need a little more timing because it's not drawing in stuff as efficiently because everything's leaking. Power adders, less timing, denser cylinder fill. That's about as much as I can really tell you. I mean, I'm not an expert on this. This is just kind of what I've gathered so far. If I'm wrong, let me know, because my brain hurts, let me tell you. So hopefully I've demonstrated and told you exactly why I can't tell you anything. Hope you got something out of that. I'll catch you next time.